Our next presenter is Robert Thurman. So joining us from someplace over the Indian Ocean through the power of video recording, Professor Robert Thurman will share some thoughts on mindfulness. As a public writer, Bob is a talented popularizer of the Buddhist teachings and the first Westerner Tibetan Buddhist monk ordained by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. He held the first endowed chair in Buddhist Studies in the West. He also is the co-founder and president of the Tibet House, U.S. New York. Mr. Thurman is considered a pioneering, creative, and talented translator of Buddhist literature by many of his peers. He was recognized by Time magazine as one of the 25 most influential Americans in 1997. In 2003, he received the Light of Truth Award, a human rights award from the International Campaign for Tibet. New York Magazine named him as one of the influentials in religion in 2006. And last year, he was a recipient of India's prestigious Padma Shri Award for Literature and Education. While we're saddened that Bob wasn't able to join us here in person to be part of our panel and later breakout, we're incredibly grateful that he recorded this message for us.
What do you see as the inner or mind and outer or worldly conditions that are contributing to the presence of incivility at this time?
Outer conditions first. I think the lack of responsibility in the media, occasioned from 1987, when under Ronald Reagan, toward the end of his time, he managed to destroy his nominees or appointees on the FCC committee, destroyed the fairness doctrine, which was in place in the US since the end of the war, and was the World War, and was meant that you could not express opinion on public airwaves without a counter opinion or fact checker right in the same program, right in your face. And they canceled that on the argument that cable was making very much a Murdoch approved argument that cable was making for plurality of opinions. And so therefore you could get another opinion on cable. And so ever since then, it became possible to lie on media freely and do propaganda type of communications and create a bubble of people who only listen to you and never looked at fact checkers about what you did, fact checkers. And also there was no counter opinion, fair and balanced. The Comedy Channel people used to tease the Fox News about fair and balanced because of course it was totally unfair and unbalanced and also untrue, most of it. And so that created, then nowadays people, pundits and things are scratching their heads. Why are we so polarized? Well, because we have propaganda going on, pretty much, very much, unfortunately, on the sort of white supremacist, right-wing, super extremist right-wing side. I won't say Republican because I don't think that party almost exists anymore, but right-wing, super right-wing, white supremacist. Reagan's first campaign event was given in Mississippi, in a town where they had murdered, Ku Klux Klan had murdered a bunch of human rights people in the 60s. And he was appealing to states' rights and things like that, which were dog whistling in those days to that kind of secessionist, white supremacist thing. So anyway, since then, there have been that huge bubble. And they might say, or some people might say CNN and MSNBC are a kind of counter-leftist bubble, but they don't really qualify because they do try to be a little more objective. They are a little bit, they have some opinion type thing. So to some extent, they are a left bubble. So that's the real reason in the culture, and that comes from the leadership. We had a certifiably clinically insane person as president due to this very polarization. And then he made it so much worse. And in a way, he did us all a favor by blowing the cover of the dog whistlers from Reagan onward. And he blew their cover by being openly white supremacist and openly lying all the time. And yet many millions of people believing him because of this culture that had been created on the media. So that's the main outward one. And, the inward one, of course, is simply that people are emotionally immature in our culture. Our education system does not train them in emotional intelligence. And it doesn't mean it's not a matter of lacking meditative skills or mindfulness practice, although those are kind of useful correctives, which is why they've become popular in the United States and in business and in corporations, because by learning to be more aware of your own mental processes, you can kind of avoid being kind of hot button reactive over a certain buzzword, or someone presses your button, so on, so you can kind of react more coolly and more strategically and more politely and more diplomatically, usually, but that is not a widely enough administered corrective to our general emotional immaturity, which is not anything racial, it's not anything national, it merely has to do with the defect in our education system, where somehow our education system, in its insistence on extreme secularity, teaches that if you sort of work morally with people in classes, in behavioral things, and sort of try to teach ethics and teach self-awareness and so forth, you're sort of encroaching upon religion, and you're intruding in religion, maybe a non-Western one or maybe a mystical Western one, and that's not possible. And they supposedly in Sunday school or in synagogue or something, you're supposed to get that kind of education, but obviously you don't. So you just get indoctrination in your particular faith. So this is the defect. So we all react very quickly and emotionally to things. So we don't have time to hear each other out. And actually, it has a very important element in our education, even at the university level, which is people cannot debate rationally, very vigorously with each other without losing their temper. There is actually the British are a bit better at that. They have a more emphasis on debating societies, and they're able to speak more vigorously to each other, even a little bit jokingly, kind of off color in a way, without taking offense on either side. So they have a more vigorous way of exchanging. And in many cultures, like in the Hindi language, the East Asian ones are also very over self-effacing and over diplomatic to some extent. But the Indians are very vigorous in the way they speak, and Latin people can speak more vigorously without losing their temper. But we have a kind of thing of you're supposed to stay cool and keep your emotions out of your discussion, and therefore you won't go very deep in a debate, because when you try to go deep, emotions will come out, and then other people will freak out. So this immaturity, as I call it, emotional immaturity, it even affects at the university level, where I've of course observed it, since I never really taught at the very lower levels, but I've observed that, and I was in schools at lower levels. So mindfulness, I think, was one of my original contributions to our dialogue, and that does help people learn to restrain their immediate reactions by watching how their inner mental narrative interacts with their reactivity and their perceptions of the manifestations of others. And so it can be very helpful in improving communication. And it's been wildly popular, actually, in business corporations and other things. And hopefully that will continue, especially since the best teachers of that try to keep it away from any kind of religious thing having to do with Buddhism or Hinduism or meditation. They just use it as meditation kind of they can't avoid. But of course, there is Christian, Jewish, Muslim, secularist meditation, but there is such a thing. So that would be my sort of set of opening statements. Outer being the climate, having to do, today, Biden, if he wants to help this, or whatever administration comes up 3 years from now, they have to restore the fairness doctrine to really take account of the power of television as a brainwashing medium if allowed to function unrestrained, and indeed even radio. The other thing Reagan did was he became friendly with Murdoch, who had done the same thing. What he did here, he did in Australia already by that time, and in England with his tabloids and his whole thing, and allow him to appeal to the lowest common denominator and cultivate a readership and an audienceship like that. And that has to be restrained. And also the ownership of many media outlets in the same markets. They changed rules and made it just wide open where you could have monopoly, like Clear Channel, 12 radio channels, and all these monopolies in media around the country that brainwash people, frankly. And maybe we all have a notion of ourselves as rugged individuals and we're all immune to brainwashing, but we're not educated to be immune to brainwashing at all. And 14 hours a day, some TV commentators in your house every day, just in the background, constantly telling you what is their version of reality with no check on them, because you're not going to consult the fact checkers. That's really damaging, actually, to our population. It's a kind of uncontrolled false education that is allowed access to the brains and minds of millions of people, and it has created a very chaotic situation in the United States of America.
Thank you, Bob. So much there that I can't wait to unpack it further. And Dr. Anderson, of course, talked about emotional civility, and you complemented it with the whole concept of civil maturity. So I can't wait to be able to talk about this in more detail. While Bob isn't with us live, you'll be able to watch the full interview that Bob Sachs had with Bob Thurman later when we post everything. So be sure to join that.